So welcome everyone to the Still Center discussion this Wednesday afternoon. Today we have Nathan Kowalsky from St. Joseph's College, which is part of University of Alberta. And he's an expert in environmental philosophy, has edited a book on hunting, writes about environmental philosophy, and is also science and technology, teaches about science and technology. Is recently working on a book on that, and writes about engagement with wilderness. So we're very excited to have Nathan talking about hunting as going home. Let's give him a warm welcome.
Thanks, everyone. All right, well, let's bring up my presentation here, which I guess I might as well use. From beginning, there we go. Yeah, so Jamie asked me to talk about maybe how I integrate a bunch of different disciplines into my work on hunting. And I thought one way to do that for me would be to talk about why I hunt. And the reason I thought I hunted ultimately was because it had something to do with me going home. So here's a picture of my hunting experience from last fall. This is the river that flows past my mom and dad's place, and that's the island in the river where I got my deer this year. Well, usually when people do philosophy of hunting, or they philosophize about it, I should say, the question is, how does hunting get morally justified, or is it morally justified? So it's not about why you hunt, it's more like maybe why you shouldn't hunt. And so if you can answer the question why hunting is okay, it's more or less a negative justification for why hunting is not a bad thing to do, but it's not often understood as a good thing to do. So I wonder if there are positive justifications for hunting. And I don't often work on that personally. It's something that I'd be interested in doing more of. So this is very rough today. Just some thoughts that I've been having on and off, and I've put them together more or less because I had the opportunity today to do so. I think there's probably a wide range of positive reasons why people go hunting. Maybe not all of them are good positive reasons. There might be inadequate reasons. Hopefully some of them are adequate. And also I think that possibly many of them won't apply to all hunters. So this is still, I think, pretty idiosyncratic for me. It might, however, give grounds for something broader than that, but I'm not entirely sure. I think for me, I hunt to go home in at least 5 different senses. And again, these titles for these different senses, I'm not even sure they're right either, but I hunt to go home geographically, ecologically, anti-industrially, anthropologically, and anti-colonially, although it gets weirder the further down the list I go, I think, in terms of home anyway. So I'm just trying to figure things out, but hopefully it makes some kind of sense. So let's do geography first. I grew up on the Northern Great Plains, about, for you guys, 95 miles north of the Montana border. I don't think in miles, but I did some math and figured it out for you. And now I live on the edge of the Northern Boreal Forest, about 435 miles north of Montana, in a city of 1 million people. So I live 340 miles away from my family home, where my parents still live and 2 of my sisters and their families live. So when I hunt and I go home to hunt, I literally go home to the place that I grew up and where I kind of really identify with. But I could easily just as well go home for other reasons than hunting. I could go home for Christmas or Easter or whatever. So on that level, hunting is not substantially connected to going home. But there are other things that are a little bit more connected to hunting there. One of them is that my grandmother was born in the grasslands where I hunt. And I worked on the homestead. That was her homestead family ranch as a teenager when I was a kid. And I now hunt there. Even though the family no longer owns that property, I have permission to hunt there. And so it's a way of going to a place where I'm attached. So my home is a place that's imbued with meaning for me. And part of the meaning of my home is hunting. Not all of it, but some of it is. Which I use the notion to help me understand this, of the distinction in geography between a place and a space. Spaces are, in geography anyway, defined as empty and abstract and interchangeable spaces. So you think about outer space, it's just nothingness, probably, or we imagine it as nothingness, the void. And if you have a graph with an axis and you plot locations on the graph, it's just dots on a grid, and the dot is just somewhere on the grid because of coordinates. Nothing else is really necessarily on the grid. So that's what a space can be at the extreme sense, I guess. On the other end, a place is not interchangeable and abstract that way. A place is singular, it's individual. So here's one geographer's definition of what a place is. It's a part of the terrestrial surface that is not equivalent to any other, and that cannot be exchanged with any other unless you change everything about it. And so when I go to my home to hunt, I'm connecting myself to a place, not a space. The place is deeply intertwined with a lot of meaning and significance for me that I can't replace and change out or move elsewhere. So one of the things about where I hunt is that I hunted there with my grandfather before my grandfather died. And I still hunt there now with my father and my daughters sometimes, and my brothers-in-law, and even sometimes their kids. And so there's a lot of meaningful connections to that specific spot on the surface of the planet Earth that has meaning for me. And no other place really has that same meaning for me. So that's, I think, one of the reasons why I hunt. So I can reconnect to my geographical home by visiting in a variety of ways, but hunting is one of those ways. And if I weren't able to go hunting there, my attachment to that place would be significantly changed. There has been times when I haven't been able to go hunting there and I felt dislocated. So hunting is a form of place attachment, or it has a role in my place attachment sense. So that's about as literal as I get, though, when I talk about going home hunting-wise. Second element is ecology. Hunting is also very place-specific, and just in general, hunting is that way. So you have to hunt differently depending on where you hunt and what you hunt. So if you hunt birds, it's going to be different than hunting moose. Or big game animals, for example. And of course, hunting deer is different than hunting moose, even though they're both big game animals. And hunting whitetail deer is different than hunting mule deer. And I do not hunt birds, moose, or whitetail deer very well. I can try, I have tried, I still try, and I'm not particularly good at those ones. And even hunting whitetail deer in the boreal forest, where I currently live, is different than hunting whitetail deer in the prairie grasslands, where I identify with my home. And I don't hunt very well in the boreal forest where I'm currently living either. So I identify as a grasslands hunter, and I mostly identify there as a hunter of mule deer. And one example, actually, of this ecological situatedness that hunters have is from a paper by Lawrence Cahoon. He points out that longtime hunters typically become experts on their hunting grounds. Hunters commonly receive queries from government agencies about non-game species of concern. This has never happened to me. I've never been asked by the government to provide specific ecological knowledge that I might have because I'm out there on the grasslands more often than they are. But it is still indicative of the potential, I suppose. And so I'm tied to a particular ecology because I'm a hunter. So I'm not only just going home because it's my family and my grandparents and my history and all that, but I'm also going home in the sense that home for me is grass and coulees and scrub and mule deer. And that's home for me. And another element of home in ecology is being a part of the processes, or some of the processes of the ecology there. Now, technically speaking, I'm always a part of ecological processes, but most of the time, the where I live and the way I live, in my office, in my house, in my building, in my city, doesn't remind me very closely of how I am participating in the ecology of the watershed, or the river basin or the forest or whatever. But when I hunt, I am doing something that is very much similar to what some other species are doing too in that same place, and that's predation. So predators are out there in my ecology, and I'm doing something that is a form of predation. It's not the same exact thing that they're doing necessarily, but similar enough to make it, I think, a part of the same category. So game animals are my prey, and if specifically it's mule deer generally. So Holmes Rolston III, a founding father of environmental ethics who actually just passed away last week, argues that hunting is a form of participating in the logic and biology of your ecosystem. And so he later says, in ways that mere watchers of nature can never know, hunters know their ecology. The hunter's success is not conquest of the ecology, but rather submission to the ecology. And it's an acceptance of the way the world is made. So there's a lot to unpack there, and I don't know if I'll unpack it all, but I'm not going hunting to watch things. Whereas if I'm going for a hike, maybe I'm going camping, I'm just going there for maybe the views oftentimes or whatever it might be. But hunting, it has a lot of views, but I'm also not there to view them. I'm there to maneuver through them in search of a thing in the ecology, the way that is often done by other animals in the ecology that are also searching for things. So hunting is not very abstract in that respect, but it has a form of hands-on ecological, or it is a form of hands-on ecological knowledge. It's practical knowledge. And the practice of doing it is one that fits me, I think, into an existing process that is ecological there. And I feel like a co-participant when I hunt in ecological process. So furthermore, when I'm participating in it, I am doing it because I think it's a good thing to do. I don't regret participating in my ecology as a predator. I actually think it's a positive ecological process that there are predators on the landscape, and one of them is me. So it's a value-laden affirmation of the ecology of the grasslands for me. And it could be, I guess, oh, not even I guess, it would also be a positive affirmation of an ecology elsewhere if I was participating in it. So because I love to be at home in the grasslands, as somebody who fits in there and belongs there, I hunt. Um, I, it is about how I feel. I feel good because I feel like I fit in and belong in a place, and that place is a meaningful place to me. But I belong in an ecological place, so I'm a lover of the grassland. So home again in that sense, I guess. A third one, and this one I really struggled to figure out a title for it or a subtitle. But it related to industrialism. Hunting is a way of stepping away from it to a certain degree. Not entirely, because I certainly am an industrial human being. But hunting is an anachronism. It doesn't really fit well generally with the broad parameters of what industrialism values. So, for example, hunting is unnecessary in industrial society for subsistence. This is often one of the reasons why people say you shouldn't do it. Because if you want to eat meat, you can just buy it from a store or a restaurant. If you don't eat meat, you can buy plant-based substitutes, maybe even grow your own plant-based substitutes. But you certainly don't have to go hunting to get your protein. And one major reason why that is because industrial agriculture can feed the world's massive population, whereas hunting very clearly cannot feed the world's population. There's just not enough wild animals to do so. However, industrial agriculture has significant environmental costs. Some examples are habitat loss, soil salinization, and watershed pollution. Others are fossil fuel emissions. And one that I'm not often aware of, but there's research on this that shows that there's a lot of animals that die from plowing, harrowing, cultivating, planting, fertilizing, and harvesting fields, um, and also pest control to get rid of certain animals that are otherwise going to take away some of the agricultural productivity of the landscape. Hunting is different than that, at least, because hunting requires little to no habitat disruption, at least how I hunt anyway. I don't know. Maybe there are some forms of hunting that require some forms of habitat disruption. I think generally, though, hunting opportunities get worse with habitat degradation, because the species ones hunts usually are the ones that are dependent on that habitat to be robust and healthy. Although sometimes you do get species that colonize degraded habitats, and then one potentially could hunt those. It's arguable that white-tailed deer actually are one of those animals that have colonized degraded agricultural landscapes, which I didn't know much about. Hunting also costs less fossil fuel per pound of food than standard industrially produced potatoes, rice, or beans, although it does cost more probably on this one estimate than organic produce does. So if you grow your potatoes, rice, or beans organically, you're probably going to use less fossil fuel than if you get in your truck and you drive to go hunting and you shoot an elk and you bring it back. So that's another way to step away from industrial agriculture in some respect. And hunting also kills far fewer animals per unit of protein than industrial soybean cultivation. So per calorie of protein, hunting is going to kill X number of animals per calorie. And it's likely that soybeans are going to kill more animals per unit of protein just because of the amount of animals that are mown down by all the machinery that goes across the field over and over again. And when I was a rancher for a little while there, I worked on this ranch, and some of the parts of the ranch were actually under cultivation. And I have memories actually of driving a machine across the field and killing an animal because I drove over it unknowingly with my hay cutter. And that just happens a ton, apparently, just that you don't often realize it or see it. Another weird thing about hunting in my province, I'm not sure if this is the case in Arkansas or anywhere else, but it's illegal in Alberta to sell my hunted food. I can't sell the meat. I can't sell the meat after I've processed it. And I can't even buy access to land to go hunting on. So Cynthia Belmont wrote a really great paper a couple of years back now on hunting and ecofeminism, and she argues that hunting is inherently anti-commodification, especially, or at least in the way it's regulated in the North American context, I think. So she's in Wisconsin, so maybe, again, state regulations differ. I'm not sure. But when I hunt, I am outside of the economic system that normally commodifies food. I still am part of the economic system to buy my rifle and buy my bullets and buy my fuel to drive down there and stuff. So that part I'm not stepping out of that much, but a large part of it is off to the left, I guess, outside of the standard industrial mainstream. Another thing that industrial food production does is hide the cost of its production. We probably don't know much, if anything, about how many animals are killed when a soybean field is cultivated. But when you hunt, you certainly do know how many animals are going to get killed from hunting, because I am the one actively doing the killing for that exact reason and purpose. Even industrially produced meat often is criticized for hiding a lot of the costs of it because it's just packaged in a nice piece of cellophane and plastic in a freezer, and people often don't even think enough about how that is a dead animal. So Belmont, again, she uses this to critique Carol Adams' view of the absent referent. She says that eating directly from the land does not hide the industrial costs or the costs of the production of the food, whereas industrialism typically does. So that's another way of stepping away from it. And so in terms of home for me, when I want to dwell in my homeland in a way that doesn't degrade my homeland, Hunting is an admittedly small but symbolically powerful method of doing that. It allows me to do something that is out of the ordinary, in some sense anyway. There's still plenty of people who hunt, of course, but it doesn't really fit the narrative generally of what modern society is supposed to be like. And one of the nice ways of one of the nice things about doing this for me is that in the process, I don't contribute as much to the degradation of the place that I love, even though, you know, something of that is always present given that I live here. A fourth aspect of how I think of myself as why I go hunting, I pull from anthropology in some way. Although here, this quote here is not from an anthropologist, but an old 1940s Spanish philosopher. He says that the hunt is not something that happens to the animal by chance. It's rather in the instinctive depths of his nature that he has already foreseen the hunter. So his claim is that animals generally view human beings as hunters, even if you are not a hunter. And the animals then will respond to you as if you're going to hunt them. And so they expect you to in some ways, even though that's, maybe what they don't want you to do, but they think you will anyway. And Bellman also makes this point. She says deer constitute her as a predator. A free, untamed, healthy white-tailed deer will run from a human being, she points out. So my being a hunter is presupposed by certain animals, maybe not all. Like there's other animals that don't think of me as a hunter because they're probably outside of my zoological ambit. But there are ones within my zoological ambit that view me as a threat. They will probably view you as a threat too, even if you're not a hunter. And so this is probably because of the way that they co-evolved with human beings over the last several 100,000 years, at least. And Hettinger, he also claims that we wouldn't have even evolved into human beings without the evolution of the human mind and the hand, which were used for hunting and probably evolved to hunt. So he suggests that if our ancestors had remained herbivores, there wouldn't have been what we now call human culture. So in that respect, anyway, hunting is why you and I have a big brain and thumbs. And hunting is why you and I are part of a tool-using species. So hunting is deeply embedded not only in my attachment to a landscape, but also in my humanity as an evolved species on the landscape. And moreover, culturally, almost 99% of the human timeline was human beings living in hunting and gathering cultures. So it's not true that prostitution is the oldest occupation. It's true that hunting is the oldest occupation, you could say, and gathering. So that's a pretty big swath of human history. So I think it's not too outlandish to suggest that hunting is fundamentally human. It's presupposed by human and non-human biology, and it is also the most dominant form of human culture over time, anyway. And yet, where I live, I might have a strong regional hunting community, or not. But even if I do, it's not the same thing as I'm living in a larger comprehensive hunting culture. So my culture in the mainstream is not a hunting culture, but I can go hunting. And even if that's temporary, and even if it's the middle of modernity that I'm doing it in, it does connect me in an anthropological sense to a very, very, very ancient and long-lived form of being human that is possibly biologically coded in some ways, at least maybe biologically coded in other animals that view me as a hunter. Maybe not in my own. I'm not saying I have an instinct to hunt. I don't believe that, but I don't know much about instinct anyway, so I'm not willing to go there. But I guess I can say that I can go home to my humanity when I hunt because I'm going to, in fact, I'm reenacting or I'm manifesting one of the most primal aspects of being a human creature. Again, not the only one. There's many other primal aspects of human creatures, but hunting is one of them. I think. Which takes me to the last version of going home that I've got today. I recognize that hunting is a privilege, and it's implicit in what I've said earlier, because if 8 billion people went hunting, then the game animals would go extinct. So the question I asked myself recently is, if I get to go hunting, then what makes me so special? Why am I one of the few people that gets to go hunting, rather than, I get 1 in an 8 billion chance to go every year? Well, the reason why we have 8 billion people in the world is because agriculture, industry, and capitalism have all replaced hunting cultures, which existed for 99% of human history. And part of the narrative of agriculture, industry, and capitalism is that hunting peoples are supposedly savages. The word savage just means people who dwell in the forest, but it's deeply laden as a pejorative term of people who are essentially subhuman or animals. So if you're a real human, goes the narrative, and progress will replace the people who are not humans with real ones, though civilized people. And that's been going on for 10,000 years, roughly. And now turns out there's not a lot of hunting people left. And in the place where I hunt, my homeland, was depopulated of indigenous hunting cultures, specifically the Blackfoot Confederacy and the Plains Cree, by an explicit policy of the Canadian Prime Minister of the time, which is our first Canadian Prime Minister, actually, to clear the plains so that European settlers could take over the grasslands. So there are no indigenous reservations within 95 miles in any direction of my childhood home. So it's just a white settler part of the prairie for me. But the land where I hunted, and I still hunt today, sorry, was chosen by many of the nations of Treaty 7, which is one of the numbered treaties of Canada, to be their reserve lands. So they wanted their reserves to be specifically where my grandparents or my grandmother was born. Indigenous warriors gathered in this area before the Battle of Little Bighorn, when they crossed the medicine line and went down there and fought Custer. And Sitting Bull, who I think was also fighting at that battle, he brought his people back up over the medicine line into Canada to escape Americans at the time, although eventually he had to go back. And the reason for that, why did he have to go back? The Canadian government did not want to feed him. The promises that were made to Indigenous people by the Canadian government and the treaty obligations that were written out and signed were not kept by the Canadian government. This is something that's I've only been learning in the last year. The government of Canada had a policy of using starvation to force nations to settle on distant reserves away from where they wanted to settle, away from where they wanted the Europeans to settle. So they were starved into submission by government policy, and many of them died. This allowed my ancestors to settle the land that I hunt on, and my ancestors are the ranchers there. So predominantly white men can hunt where I hunt because of the Canadian genocide of Indigenous peoples. So going home is really not something as comfortable as it used to be for me, because my homeland was stolen from hunting cultures, which is ironic if I'm going home to hunt. And I don't know how to honor these people when I hunt, except by acknowledging the fact that I'm hunting on stolen land, that my home was their home. And so that's one of the things that I struggle with in terms of me thinking about going home, is that the colonial nature of what I am able to do isn't good. So this is an ongoing thing for me. So it's not a reason why I hunt, but it's a thing I think about when I hunt, and it's directly related to going home. And it might have some implications about whether or not I should continue to hunt. So yeah, to wrap things up, I hunt, number one, to go home to a meaningful place for me, where I have senses of attachment to that place because of hunting. Number two, I hunt ecologically because I feel like it embeds me in a homeland, in a grassland that is meaningful to me in a way that makes me a participant in the ecology of the system as a predator. Third, I hunt to take me away from industrial food production. And so I'm going home in a way that is less damaging than if I were to be a rancher or a farmer in the same place. And fourth, I hunt to take me home in a sense of taking me home to my humanity in a way, I suppose, where I'm reconnecting to something that is almost universal in my species. And then finally, I go home to hunt because I regretfully, the land that I hunt on is home that is not my home in a way. It's someone else's home. And so when I think about that, then I think again, I think twice, and it causes me to pause. So I'm not sure actually what to do with that and with a lot of this, but those are a lot of the disciplines that I engage with when I think about hunting, and I am trying out the possibility that this might give me a set of a way of understanding why it is that I hunt. But anyway, here's my sources. If you're interested, there they are. I don't know if you want this PowerPoint or not, but that's it for me. So I'm perfectly happy to chat with you guys about it if you would like to. Thanks.
Any questions? Start the discussion.
Yes. I just talking with you.
Yeah.
Okay, the microphone's wrong, but just make sure you
Oh,
talk
okay.
loud.
Do you want me to get you closer? Can you hear me?
I can, but I'll strain myself to make sure I hear you
just
well.
come clo- Here, I'll just come closer.
Okay, all right. Thanks.
So yeah, no problem. So hi.
Hi.
But so I know you had mentioned how like the hunting culture has kind of been decreasing, like over the last probably couple hundred years. Do you find that in the areas that you hunt, is there like, I guess, like hunter friendly places? So like, I mean, where my home is like in Illinois, we have a lot of butchers. So
Mhm.
like, do you find it something where like, if you are somebody who does decide that like, I don't want to get my food from the store, I want to go out and I want to get it myself, are there like less places that will allow you to like, go and hunt and bring that your catch to that place from the butcher? Or is there still like I guess like a culture there that is trying to support those who still want to incorporate hunter and gathering lifestyles into their their
Hmm.
dietary choices?
Mm-hmm. Butcher wise, it's not bad. I have a butcher actually that's in a little village that's not too far from my mom and dad's place. And his business is so busy during hunting season that he actually gives people a discount if they bring their deer in a couple of months after hunting season's over, so that he can process it all. Up here where I'm living now, I think it's roughly the same. You can find butchers that will process wild meat without too much difficulty. It's a bit of a problem for the butcher themselves because the regulations are that they have to use separate machinery for all of it, because the meat that I hunt is not inspected by a government inspector, and so it can't be certified as being clean or whatever. And so you can't have a possibly contaminated animal butchered on the same machinery that the inspected beef would be on or whatever. So it's a bit of an outlay, I think, in terms of investment for the butcher to have two sets of that. But they seem to do it, I think, because there's enough of a hunting culture currently in our industrial modern society up here for that to be viable for them. But maybe the biggest obstacle is land access, because most of the land around here is privately owned land. And unless you know someone with land, it's not easy for you to find land that you can hunt on with. You have to ask for permission, obviously. There is some crown land. Crown land is land that is owned by King Charles III. Technically speaking, it's the government of Canada who owns it, right? But we call it Crown land because it's owned by the Crown up here. It's, I guess, public land, I think you would probably call it generally down there. And if you can find it, you can maybe hunt on it. There might be a lot of other people there too. So it depends. If you want to be hunting with a lot of other people around you, it's not always great. So often it's the people who've been hunting for a long time, and because their family has hunted and they have connections to other landowners that you can. So when I go hunting down south, where I grew up, down south, by the way, is north of the border for you guys. um, my dad calls the ranchers that he knows, and if my dad no longer does that, I'll be stuck because I'm like, I'm gonna have to start calling these ranchers, and I don't know if they're gonna want to talk to me and give me permission to hunt. So personally, I think that's the biggest obstacle for hunting up around here is finding the place to go hunting. And that's a lot of it is it's knowledge of local people. And if you're kind of an urbanite, like I am up here, I don't know any of the farmers and the ranchers outside of my hometown or the town that is now my hometown, I guess. It doesn't feel like it, but whatever. So yeah, that's so the butcher is not as big of an issue, I don't think. It's more like land access.
Can you see? Okay.
Yep.
I had a
Hi.
question.
Sure.
Do you think there's a right and a wrong way to hunt as an individual? Like, is there a way that if you do hunt, it's, I guess, like, what are specific ways that you can ethically hunt?
Oh yeah, I do think that, yes. There is a kind of a generally accepted ethic for hunters that's about 100 years old, kind of started with President Theodore Roosevelt, the discoverer of the teddy bear. Apparently, the rough story of the teddy bear, do you guys know this story? Some kind of bear cub was tied up against a tree or whatever, and then somebody said, you know, come over and shoot it. And he's like, no. So it's called the fair chase ethic. And the notion is that if you hunt an animal, the way to do it well, or the way to do it properly, is to hunt it in a way that allows the animal to exercise its capacity to evade the hunter. And so that it's a game in some sense. That's part of the reason maybe why they call it game animal. Between the hunter has a set of behaviors and practices that it uses to try to detect, and the animal, that is the prey animal, has a set of behaviors that it uses to try to avoid detection. So either running really fast, or being really silent and still, or being camouflaged. Whereas the hunter is like walking really still, being really silent or maybe camouflaged, but totally different vector, right? One is in a seeking mode, and the other one is a aware and ready to flee mode. So if you hunt in a way that takes the prey animal's ability to utilize its capacities for running really fast, or to hide, or to be silent, like you tied a bell onto the deer so you could always hear where it was, right? Or if you use X-ray vision goggles to see it no matter how it was hiding, you could just see its heat signature, right? Or if you put it in an enclosure so it can run around a little bit, but it can't get out, these would violate the fair chase ethic. And so I think those are generally good ideas. There's criticisms that one can levy against them in one way or another. In fact, a lot of the hunting regulations probably are there to codify certain aspects of the fair chase ethic. Like, it's not legal to hunt with a drone in Alberta. It's not legal to hunt a moose when it's swimming, because when it's swimming, it's extra vulnerable to predators and is not able to utilize its normal capacities for evasion, etc., like things like that. So that's generally how I would approach the question of if we accept the moral acceptability of hunting anyway, then the way to do it well and good is to hunt fair chase. And I think, even though there's going to be disagreements maybe about how to exactly do that, I think broadly speaking, it's a really solid set of guidelines that we can use. When you take a hunting ethics course to get your license to be a hunter in Alberta, one of the sections of the course will be on those kinds of ethics. It's hopefully that, you know, it passes on to the new hunter.
I wanted to ask a question about Aldo Leopold sometimes talks about hunting as like a way to learn how to cooperate with the natural world. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, because you kind of mentioned it in the contrast between like domination and submission, right? But like, how is, in your experience, how is hunting, how does it teach you how to cooperate in a variety of ways?
Yeah, like I think it's fairly easy for me to imagine ways that I could dominate a landscape, or I could dominate an ecology. I would harness it and control it. I would maybe pave part of it. I would maybe fence it. I might cultivate it. I might plow it. I might reseed it with what I want. And so a lot of the things that agriculture and industry and capitalism do would probably, I think, count as non-cooperation, although there are more or less cooperative ways to do agriculture, arguably speaking. You could try to force the grasslands to grow palm trees, right? It just would not really work super well. So there's some kind of cooperation with agrarian stuff too. So Wendell Berry is like one of those cooperative agrarian type guys. But when I hunt, I'm pretty conscious of how not agrarian I am in that moment. I'm crossing fence lines to look for animals that jump over fences. Which normally the fence is there to keep them from other animals from doing that. And also the animals that I'm pursuing are wild animals because they haven't been genetically modified over the last 10,000 years to be docile and tolerant of being in enclosures. So even though they're running away from me, hopefully they're not running away from me. Hopefully I'm going to find them before they notice that I am there, and then they don't run away from me. But they're on the lookout for me. So even though they're doing that, that doesn't sound very cooperative because it sounds like there's a conflict between the two of us. But what I'm cooperating with is what they do as wild animals in their environment, over top of and in spite of the settlement that has been imposed on that landscape to restrict it. And then also, one of the things I notice when I hunt is I often will be looking down at the ground, and I'll notice the grass or the moss. It's a very dry part of the world where I hunt. It's a semi-arid plain, and there's 2 species of cactus that naturally grow there. We have one desert in Canada. It's a tiny little bit of the Sonoran Desert that just pokes above the border, and they only have 1 species of cactus. So I feel like we're almost more legit desert than they are, even though technically they're a desert because they have less rainfall than we do. But I have to be very cooperative when I'm crawling around in the grass, so I don't crawl onto a cactus. But I also will notice the state of the grass. I can spot when it's been overgrazed. I've learned to spot when it's been previously cultivated and then sown back to grass, because I can tell that there isn't the same kind of moss and lichen and other kinds of flora, whoops, that cover the soil in where the grass wouldn't be able to cover it. That gets lost during cultivation, and it takes forever for that crust to get replaced after cultivation with new reseeding. So I don't have scientific biological expertise on the species and the ecology of this grassland, but I can sense it, I can feel it, in a way, because I can notice when it's been a hard year or a hard set of years and the grass is down to stubs and there's open dirt and whatnot, or clay, as opposed to when the grass is this high or higher yet and it's waving in the wind like water on the ocean. And so I don't know if I'm cooperating in a direct sense there, but I'm noticing its health, I guess, if you want to call it that, maybe. And I'm feeling good or bad about how it's doing. And then I'm also feeling fairly good about me not having done what would normally cause it to be degraded. So I'm not plowing it anymore. I mean, when I did work on the ranch, there were times that I cultivated fields, and I very consciously am not doing that when I'm hunting because that's quite obvious to me that I'm not. So I'm kind of a visitor in a way because this is not where I normally spend all of my time, even though I certainly would like to. But I'm also not just a visitor. I'm returning to a place that I love and feel connected to. And so in that sense, the fittingness of it, when I feel like I'm fitted in with the ecological reality there, I feel that's cooperative in a way that a lot of the other, like driving my car on the highway, doesn't feel like I'm fitting in any meaningful sense. I'm not certain that really does answer your question
No,
fully.
that's helpful. Yeah. I mean, I was also, when you were talking about the ecological, I thought you were going to talk about like, our role, right? Like ecological role, because you mentioned it in terms of like being a predator,
Hmm.
but whenever, I think in certain places when you hunt, you also could be prey, and
Hmm.
you can be more aware of like participating in um, in hunting with other animals that have
Hmm.
the same role. Like, so like say you're fishing for salmon in Alaska
Hmm.
in the same stream that bears would,
Hmm.
you'll be aware of the bears are at the same kind of
Yep.
ecological structure that you are,
Yep.
right? And if you're out hunting for elk and there's wolves around,
Yep.
you'll be aware of, I'm not just a predator, right? So
Yep.
prey. So
Yep.
there's a sense in which like that's also a sense of an ecological home, as whatever role we play
Yep.
in that.
Yeah, the predator role is part of the homecoming for me, but the sad part about where I hunt is that most of the large predators were extirpated before I ever got there. I found out by reading a book on hunting in Alberta that at the turn of the 20th century, from the 19th, where I hunt is was the number one spot to hunt grizzly bear on the plains in the grassland. And there are no grizzly bears on the plains anymore.
Wow.
I didn't have a clue about that.
Yeah,
There's
we don't even think about grizzly bears as being on the plains for the most
right,
part.
but apparently they're a plains animal, which is why they do not like forests. They like to be above the tree line in the
Right.
mountains where there are no any trees, generally
Mhm.
speaking, which I blew my mind. The black bears love trees. That's why they can climb them, and the grizzlies can't, apparently. So yeah, there's no grizzlies anymore. The wolves were extirpated. The last two prairie wolves were taxidermied and mounted on the wall in the men's club downtown Medicine Hat, where you know you could go for lunch if you were a member of the club, and then they're stuck on the wall. So the wolves are gone. The coyotes are around, and you see coyotes. I every once in a while I'm hunting and I don't see a deer, I'll see a coyote running. So there is a bit of a sense of like, yeah, I got a role there, but it's not one where I feel like I could be prey because normally coyotes don't attack humans.
Mhm.
Um, and then the cougar, mountain lion, they have come back, oddly enough, because I think part of what's happened is that the deer population has been managed well enough so that there's enough deer for the cougar to recognize it as a lucrative hunting opportunity, and they've recolonized parts of the southern corner of my province, which has the Cypress Hills in it, which is like a um, almost a little set of mountains that pop out of the prairie, and then the cougars go in there, and then they follow the deer up the creeks, and they end up in town. So there are cougars around, and if cougars are around in town, you do feel like you could be possibly prey. But I've never seen one in my life. I've never even seen a footprint of one. So it's not part of my conscious experience where I'm like, oh. But one thing I didn't bring up though, when you do hunt, you can actually have a sense of your own mortality just because of your when you butcher or you field dress a game animal, you cut it open and you recognize the similarities between yourself and it. You're not dead, obviously, because you're the one who did the killing. And so some interpretations of hunting view this as a form of domination. But others, and this is how I relate to it, is it's an act of sympathetic recognition, so that the general biology of a deer is almost indistinguishable from mine. My sister is a medical doctor. While she was in med school, she came hunting once, and she was really, really excited to dissect the deer. So it took us 2 hours longer than it would normally take us to gut the deer, because she was step by step identifying all the parts that she had learned about in anatomy. Same anatomy as roughly, I mean, ours. They don't have a gallbladder, but other things like this, they have a liver and they have genitalia and they have heart and lung and esophaguses and tracheas and stomachs and everything else, right? So in that sense, I contemplate my mortality and my own death and my physical gooiness, because I'm enmeshed literally in some ways with the gooiness and the physical mortality of another being, which is super strange and weird. And I don't know if it totally works, but sometimes I think about someday I will be food for something else, just not at this moment. But I don't often think about myself as food for some other things unless I'm encountering the death of my own food, I guess. So there's that, I suppose.
Yeah, it reminds me of the first time that I shot a pheasant with my dad. He opened up the bird,
Mm-hmm.
took blood and like put it on my face. And he didn't tell me that was going to happen. Like, and so I was like, what are you doing? Right. So there's like rituals of
Yep.
that he had and that his dad had.
Yep.
I had to experience that. And
yeah,
I didn't know that was going to happen, but it was like this connection. Right. So yeah.
That's fascinating. Yeah. Remember that you are but dust, and to dust you shall return.
Mm-hmm.
Or in this case, blood. Yep.
Blood.
Yeah. We also had a fun fact. I guess it's not legal to sell wild game in Arkansas, but it can be donated to programs like Farmers and Hunters Feeding the Hungry.
Oh yeah.
So that's good to know.
Yeah, I don't know if we got something like that in Alberta, but we might. It was brought up. I teach a class on hunting, and one of my students mentioned something to that effect, and I don't know if they were talking about it elsewhere or in the province here. So yeah, you can give it away. So I have done that. There have been times when the wildlife managers were needing to cull the herd because of certain diseases, and there was a lot of tags that were distributed to hunters. So rather than me getting one, I would get two, or if I got two, I got four. And so suddenly I had way too much meat, right? I couldn't eat it possibly all, so I would just give it away. That's perfectly fine, right? So free meat is cool, and so yeah. But again, that's outside of the commodity economy, right? It's not something that anyone can pay for. The butcher costs, I think you could probably have them pay the butcher. Here's the meat, you pay the butcher, kind of a thing. But beyond that, I don't think so.
Yeah, and that like reciprocal relationship is uncomfortable for people.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I mean, when I gather eggs, give people a dozen eggs, they're like, how much can I give you?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, no, like part of this is there's abundance and I'm sharing with you. Right?
Yeah.
And so the very act of sharing abundance as like a reciprocal relationship is something that's so uncommon that people think they have to pay for it. Right?
Yeah.
they're undermining the very practice by bringing money into it. Right.
Yeah, I think that might be true of a lot of hunting cultures, is that they operate from a vision of abundance rather than scarcity, even though it's common, I think, to view hunting cultures and foraging cultures as people living hand to mouth, barely fending off starvation. But it's gift giving of food is, I think, foundational to a ton of them. Whereas in agrarian cultures, it's because I think because food is extracted in an agrarian culture through labor, unwillingly, as if the earth didn't want to give it to you and you had to force it somehow. And because of that, I think metaphorical practice, the way that metaphor comes out of the practice, I think, probably generates this notion of ownership and also scarcity, also because if there's a famine or there's inadequate supplies, and no one's going to give you their free labor. So I think there's maybe anthropological stuff that one could investigate further there to talk about why that might be the case. But I'm trying to remember now. Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer is a book that I've read a couple years ago. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Yeah.
I feel like she talks in there about the notion of abundance as a kind of a starting point, even though there's times of the year where it's lean and there's not a lot of food in the hunger moon. But I thought the abundance of things was foundational in a lot of ways. I'd have to go back and revisit it because my memory is so bad. But yeah, that's one of the things I want to really learn a whole lot more about is the local hunting cultures here that are indigenous. If they can, I don't know if I can sit at their feet and learn what they think about the world because of their hunting traditions. But that's one of the things I want to do if I could.
Yeah. Well, there's a show. Have you watched Primal Survivor?
No, I haven't. No.
It's on HBO, and he's an anthropologist.
Ah,
He goes around the world and he goes through the rites of passage in mostly hunting rites
yeah.
of passage within different cultures.
Oh, nice.
And learns their language and stays with them. Kind of, there'll be a wedding, and so he'll have to go hunt with people to get a
Yeah.
pig, let's say, for the wedding ceremony.
Yeah.
And there is a connection always between, you know, the hunt and some gift, right?
Mhm.
Like a human gift, you know, not silverware, you know, or bowls from a pottery barn, but
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
you know, feathers of a bird or something, right? Or,
Yeah.
or some rare plant to make
Yeah.
to make a necklace or something.
Hmm.
But
Oh,
yeah.
it's the gift of strawberries. That's the chapter in Robert
Yeah,
Wall
the gift of
Kimmerer.
strawberries.
Yeah.
We're reading Braiding Sweetgrass next fall.
Oh, great.
So that's
Nice. Yeah. We just had the DEI thing is a big deal in the States right now, I think.
yeah.
Also in Canada, and especially, well, maybe not all of Canada, but Alberta is kind of like Texas in a way where I live. So
Mhm.
we just got rid of the language in our university. However, we had a DEI reading group a year ago, and it's still ongoing, but that's when I read Braiding Sweetgrass, and it was really powerful. Yeah. Anyway, so I'm glad you guys are going to work through that text as well.
Well, other questions or things I want to discuss? Well, let's thank Nathan for sharing with us today.
Thanks, guys. It was an
And
honor to be invited.
yeah, thanks so much for it. This is a great project. I'm looking forward to hearing what happens. And,
Yeah, I mean, it was. I don't know what I'll do on it next, but it's at least I've got something out of it now. Like I wrote something down, but I don't know how I'm gonna focus it. But yeah, next thing I'll write on hunting will be the chapter on hunting in the handbook for environmental philosophy that we've got you writing on. Is it neuroaesthetics we got you writing on?
the possibility of the neuroaesthetics of natural environments.
Yeah, sweet. Yeah. So
Which I'm going to say it's not possible.
cool. Yeah, it's not my thing, but Richard, the other guy, he's he's really into aesthetics. So, but I'm excited. Yeah, but that's the next thing I'll write on hunting is that that chapter, because I asked around to see if anyone else wanted to write on it, and they're like, nah. So that'll be me. So I'm
Great.
gonna probably have to bring in some of the stuff that I was getting at the end of this talk on colonialism. That's
Mhm.
that's probably where I'll take that stuff. But anyway, thank you again for the opportunity. It was really nice to have an excuse to think about this kind of thing and chat with you guys about it.
All right. Well, thank you. Have a good night.
You too. Take care.
Take
Bye-bye.
it easy.
Yeah.
We'll talk soon.
All right. Sounds good.